So these are the YouTube terms of service, and today we're going to look at the first thing that I look at when I review terms of service for a new website or platform that I'm considering using. Now, I look at a lot of these terms because I work with these kind of terms. I read terms of service, I write terms of service. That's what I help my law clients to do, at least some of the time. But you are still on your own here. I can't both make this information available to anyone who might choose to watch it, and also stand responsible for what you may do if you hear what I say and run with it. I'm just going to give you an opportunity to see this a little bit through a lawyer's eyes, or at least the part of it that I'm going to cover today through a lawyer's eyes. But that's going to be a high-level view. What matters is that if you have a specific problem or question, that someone combines full legal knowledge, not partial analysis or commentary, but full legal analysis with the specifics of your situation. Those two come together and they produce legal advice. What we're going to be doing today is just an overview of the legal part. Please don't share information about your specific issue in comments or otherwise. If you really need help, find someone who can ask the questions to get your situation and put that together with a full legal read to produce advice that you should follow. Anyway, what do I look for in the terms for a website? Well, if the website is for sharing creative content like video in the case of YouTube, or maybe writing in the case of a blog platform, let's say Medium, or photos, or tweets or anything like that, often the point of using the service is to see other people's contributions of that kind and to share my own. And so one of the first things I look at is, well, what are the terms, the legal terms in the terms of service that say what the company providing the service can do with my contributions, and maybe what others can do with my contributions? Does that line up with my expectations? So for example, when I share a video like this one on YouTube, I expect other people to watch it, of course, and well, maybe not many, but I expect some people to watch it, and I expect them to be able to share it to some extent, and maybe put it in playlists, and maybe up or down with the thumbs and so on. But what else can they do, or what else can YouTube do with the content that I've uploaded? That's the question we're going to ask today. The other question that I almost always ask about terms for a website is, what contributions are they taking from me that maybe I don't expect? What data are they collecting about me or for me that maybe is not exactly what I was expecting when I signed up, or just from using the website? That's a question that's usually answered in the privacy policy, which I also hope to look at from YouTube and from Google soon in a different video. But today we're going to look at the terms of service. And as I skim through, and I have reviewed these fairly recently, but not just before this video, what I'm looking for is a magic word called license. There it is. So depending on the kind of contributions or the kinds of content that I hope to receive and also plan to share through a site like YouTube, depending on the kind, it probably comes under what we call intellectual property law. So intellectual property law is ideas like copyright or patent or trade secret. Copyright in particular comes up with YouTube. I have copyright in the video you're watching now. Others have copyright in the videos that they've shared, hopefully. And there may also be materials inside of those videos, like these terms of service, for example, in which other people have copyright. So I take it Google probably has copyright, or YouTube probably has copyright in these YouTube terms of service. I won't get into how I can use them without asking their permission now. We may get into that later. But what I want to ask about, the question I want to bring to these terms of service is really, well, what permission is YouTube getting for my video? And what permission am I giving perhaps to other users of YouTube for my video? And that comes in the form of what we call a license. I own copyright in my video. Copyright in general, very, very general strokes, says, well, I can control who can copy my work, who can make other works based on my video, and I can control distribution. And part of the reason the law gives me that power is so that I can make money to compensate me for creating this video, or to incentivize me, to encourage me to do that in the first place. So what does that look like? Well, I give other people permission to do what my copyright would otherwise prohibit. And we call that permission, in legal terminology, a license. So here I find a section called License to YouTube. So I'm starting to think, well, hey, that's probably the place where it says what YouTube can do with my content, like this video. And I see another license in a heading here, which is license to other users, which is exactly what I was looking for, right? So I expect that this says what YouTube can do with my video, and this says what you can do with my video. or maybe what other users of the platform, YouTube, can do with my video. So let's take a read through. By providing content, now that's capitalized, so I expect that that's defined somewhere else. And if you've seen my last video, we talked a bit about defined terms. And maybe I can glance through. These are bolded, that's very common, but not all the defined terms in these terms of service are bolded. So I may not be able to jump. Oh, here it is. Here I suspect it is. Content on the service. The content of the service includes videos, audio, ... collectively content. So whenever I see content, this is what we call a defined term. Whenever I see the term content with a capital C elsewhere in the terms of service, it means this stuff here. So this list begins with the content of the service includes video, audio, for example, music and other sounds, graphics, photos, text, ... branding, interactive features, software metrics, other materials provided by you, YouTube or a third party. So content has a kind of a broad definition here, and we could think of it as a lot of things that are covered by copyright. I might have copyrighting graphics that appear in this video, although there won't be any other than my scribblings. Photos, text, well, this text is copyright Google rather than me, and videos. So I have copyright in this video. So that's what's meant by content here. Oop, and I've smeared some ink on the page. By providing content to the service, and service here means YouTube generally. I'll skip going back to find that definition, but capital S means probably a defined term. You grant to YouTube, so I give YouTube, a worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, sub-licensable, and transferable license. There's that word, license again. All right, so we'll stop there. This long list of adjectives, worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, sub-licensable, and transferable. That's very common in traditionally drafted license terms. License lawyers use that kind of list a lot. Worldwide means everywhere in the world, not limited to the United States, for example. Non-exclusive means I'm giving this license to YouTube, but that doesn't mean YouTube's the only one who can get a license like this. I may license others, and in fact, I probably will down here. Royalty-free is a little bit vague. Royalties in general are kind of a broad term for fees under copyright. So I'm not charging YouTube any fees for this. Sub-licensable. So that's me, am giving YouTube this license, permission to do stuff with my content, including my videos, right? That's a license. If YouTube turns around and gives a license for my work, for my content to someone else, we would call that a sub-license. So sub-licensable, YouTube can pass on the permission that I've given for my content under these terms. And transferable. Well, that means that YouTube can take its license and give it to someone else. Not keep its license and sub-license somebody, but to transfer its rights in my content, or its license for my content overall to someone else. This is very common, for example, when a company reorganizes itself. Maybe it begins life as a corporation formed under the laws of Delaware, and it becomes a limited liability company formed under the laws of California. That's technically two different, what we call legal entities, and if they're just changing their legal form, then old YouTube, that Delaware corporation, might transfer to new YouTube, that California LLC. YouTube isn't actually, I think, or at least the counterparty in these terms isn't a Delaware corporation, but I just gave that as an example. All right, so backing up again, by providing content to the service, so when you upload videos, for example, you grant YouTube, you give YouTube permission with all of these adjectives everywhere in the world, not necessarily just YouTube, without any payments for it, with an ability to license others and an ability to transfer that license to other legal entities. A license to use that content, so to use my video, for example, including to reproduce, here's another list, distribute, prepare derivative works, display, and perform it. So this is a list of verbs that come from the United States Copyright Act. In particular, these are the things that copyright allows me to control, or at least some of them, right? Copyright, well, the copy in copyright is actually written out as reproduce in a lot of the Copyright Act. So making copies, right? Distribute, which we can read a lot like publish, for example, or to share. Prepare derivative works, that's very jargon. That's right out of the language of the United States Copyright Act and some other countries' copyright acts, which essentially means to make new work based on this one. So, for example, if you're going to take this video and cut a piece off or add a bit on there or change the audio or add a backing track, for example, I think in most of those cases it would count as a work based on this video, and that we would call preparing a derivative work. Display, all right, and perform. Now perform, I don't know, applies so much to this video. We talk about performance in terms of copyright in songs or plays or that kind of thing. All right, in connection with the service and YouTube's and its successors and affiliates, we'll get back to that business. All right, so now we have an including for. Let's stop there for now and go back to the beginning. So by providing content to the service, for example, by sharing video with YouTube, you grant to YouTube, you give YouTube permission all over the world, not necessarily just to YouTube, without any fees, with the special power of being able to pass on that license right or that permission to someone else, and transferable, this power to move the license or the permission to another legal entity, company, for example, license, permission to use that content, my video, for example, parenthetical, in connection with the service and YouTube's business. All right, so let's forget the parentheticals for now. And let's cut out this long list, which we've gone over for a number of times, and shorten it again. And I'll speak now, I'll point to the words as they're written on the page, but I'll speak my kind of translations that we've been working with so far, you've been hearing. By uploading a video to YouTube, you give YouTube permission to use that video in connection with YouTube and YouTube's business. Now that's not a direct translation. I'm not saying that those words have the same meaning. What I'm trying to do is give a little bit more of an approachable translation. We can't substitute my translation for the terms on the page. The terms on the page are the ones that we agree to when we sign up for YouTube. But hopefully that gives more of a sense of how I'm parsing this, how I'm pulling this apart, how I'm understanding it in my mind, as opposed to necessarily how it's encoded on the page, right? Okay, and finally we have a clarification, including for the purpose of promoting and distributing part or all of the service. And the service, again, is YouTube, broadly speaking. So that's interesting. One thing we might ask when we see something like including for tacked at the end of a sentence is whether we're surprised by what comes next. So if I upload a video to YouTube, I give YouTube permission to use my video in connection with YouTube and YouTube's business. Does that include promoting and redistributing part or all of the service of YouTube? Well, arguably, yes, it's very broad, but it could come across as a little surprising, and that's probably why they've added this clarification, including for. They can use it not just as part of YouTube or as part of the business of making YouTube available or selling ads or whatever it is else that they do as part of their business, but also promotion. So advertising YouTube, for example. Now, it's not perfectly clear how broad that goes. You see all the words that are on the terms right here, and I don't think any of these have, promoting in particular, I don't think has any special legal meaning. I don't have X-ray vision and see a definition of promoting here that is different from the one you would find in the dictionary. But one question that I often ask when I go looking into terms like this, precisely with this question, well, what can they do with the content that I'm sharing, is I say, well, what's the difference between the permission that they take or that they ask for and the permission that I expected just by virtue of using the service? Right, I think that I expect that, for example, YouTube can make copies of, well, where was that? Here it is, reproduce my videos. Of course they're going to need to do that. They're going to need to make copies to send one to you and to other viewers and to store it on their servers and to keep it from disappearing if a computer goes bad or a hard drive dies, right? That's really pretty expected. But do I expect when I upload a video, just having used YouTube, not having read these terms, that they can use it to promote YouTube? Well, maybe I do and maybe I don't. This feels a little buried to me. I mean, they've told us right out front, and I guess they could have just argued without this including for part that they had the right to do that as part of YouTube's business. But that's something worth thinking about as you decide to make videos available on YouTube. And again, this isn't a perfectly watertight, conclusive reading. I'm giving you my first blush impression as I go through this. So let's go back and tag a few of the little bits that we skipped, right? So there was another parenthetical, I think, here. Okay, so here we have the part that says, well, they can use the videos in connection with YouTube and YouTube's business, and in between YouTube and business, we have this parenthetical, and its successors and affiliates business. All right, so those are kind of legal jargon. Successors, well, we talked a little bit earlier about, hey, if a company starts out formed in one way legally, and then it transforms itself, it reforms, it restructures itself, we often say, into another form. Well, we might call that its successor. new YouTube legal entity is old YouTube legal entity's successor. And there are various kinds of laws about the forming of companies and other aspects that in which this word is used. It's kind of the one who inherits from in a kind of a more of a legal sense. And affiliates, well, that's defined somewhere. I won't go and find that definition now. But generally speaking, the word affiliate is defined to mean, okay, if you're a division, well, it's your company. If you're a company subsidiary, well, it includes your parent company and your subsidiaries. And maybe you're not related like that. You're not a subsidiary or the parent of another company, but you're owned by someone in common. Let's say, well, I imagine that Jeff Bezos, for example, maybe all of the different companies that he owns aren't part of one big pyramid of companies where one owns all the others, for example. It may be true, it may not. But all of them are under his control to some extent, right? He's a control person. Now, I'm not saying anything about Jeff Bezos in particular, but only to point out that the definitions of affiliates that we tend to see in these terms cover all of those scenarios. So it's kind of you and your corporate family, or you and your business family. If there's another service company that, let's say, Google uses internally to deal with testing or customer service, for example, and they also happen to do customer service for YouTube. Well, this is saying, well, that affiliate can use your content for its business too. All right, so that's the license to YouTube. Here's one that's maybe more interesting. Some platforms or some websites, you put content into them. You may not really get any content out that comes from other users. Sometimes the rules for using what you see on, let's say, a web form aren't exactly clear, and sometimes we have to look into the terms of service to see that. So, license to other users, let's dive in. You also grant each other user of the service, which includes YouTube again, here's that list, worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free license. So it's a shorter list than we saw. It doesn't have sub-licensable. It doesn't add this power to be able to pass on its rights. And let's see, royalty-free and transferable. So it doesn't have this power either. The permission that you're getting under this set of terms for my video, you can't transfer to someone else, and you can't pass on permission. Say, well, I have permission to make copies, for example, of Kyle's video, and so I'm passing that permission on to you. Now you can't too. That's not included in this list. Here's that keyword again, license, which I've been translating as permission. To access your content through the service, all right, so far you're good, and to use that content, including to reproduce, well, we've seen this before, reproduce, distribute, prepare derivative works, display, and performance, so that's the same list up here, only as enabled by a feature of the service, such as video playback or embeds. And then we have a clarification. Well, let's back up and cover this part first. You also grant each other user of YouTube or permission to access your video through YouTube and use that video, including to make copies of it, share it, make new work based on it, display it, perform it, only as enabled by a feature of YouTube. Right, so that's a bit more limited than we saw up here. We didn't see this limitation only as enabled by a feature of the service. That's playing a role down here in the license that you get from my video through these terms, that in connection with the service YouTube and YouTube's business played above, right? So it's a different, we could call that a restriction, we could call that a limitation, we could call that a different scope, right? YouTube can do all these things with my work in connection with YouTube and YouTube's business, including promotion, but you can do these things only as enabled by a feature of YouTube. Interesting. So that's bringing all of the choices that they've made in terms of coding or designing or supporting YouTube, all the things that they've made YouTube able to do, what you can click on, right? Really a part of these terms. If YouTube doesn't have a way for you to do it, then this license doesn't cover it. So this doesn't look like what we traditionally call incorporation by reference, which is in one legal document points to another, and the other document kind of becomes a part of the one that pointed to it. It's incorporated by reference. The reference says something like the attached terms and conditions, and here are the terms and conditions, and they kind of become a part of that master agreement, for example. That isn't exactly what's going on here, but it's kind of what's going on here, right? Now we have to know what the features of the service, which is the features of YouTube, are, because those are a limitation, the scope of the license that you are getting for my content and I'm getting for content that other users post on YouTube. such as playback or embeds. And those are examples of things that, examples of features of YouTube for working with videos. So again, making copies, well, that's important for being able to play a video. You have to kind of make a copy of it to play it when you use a computer. For reasons I won't get into, that's kind of how computers work. And distributing, preparing derivative works, displaying and performing, well, embedding kind of gets to some of those. If you use an embed to, let's say, put a YouTube video on your blog or your homepage, or I don't know, on your Facebook page, something like that, well, you may count as distributing the video. I said earlier that this could be read a bit like publish under the Copyright Act. Prepare a derivative work, well, if you put other material around my video and you add bells and whistles to it, and then it becomes that those bells and whistles are creative and you have copyright in those, then maybe the whole is work based on my video. Maybe you put a very strange frame around the video, or maybe you put my video in a bigger video that makes fun of my video as it plays, something like that. Well, that would be a work based on mine, or what we call a derivative work. Displaying and performing, well, you get the picture. Putting a video somewhere else where I didn't expect it, well, they might trip those wires, so to speak, in the Copyright Act, and that means you would need my permission, and here you're getting it, only as enabled by a feature of YouTube. All right, and let's look at the last sentence. For clarity, this license, which is the permission, does not grant any rights or permissions. Well, I'm not quite sure what the difference between rights or permissions is, but lawyers do that a lot. We'll use two words when one will do, and often it can get us in trouble, but that's neither here nor there. So for clarity, this license does not grant any rights or permissions for a user to make use of your content independent of this service. So here we have two sides of what they hope is one coin, right? On the one hand, you have permission to do all of these wonderful things, only as enabled by a feature of the service. And down here, just to drive that point a bit more, they're saying, well, this license doesn't give you any permission to do all these wonderful things with my videos, independent of YouTube, independent of the service. Service is defined a little more broadly than just YouTube, but I skipped over that. So again, let's return to that question. Is this what we would expect if there were no terms of service? And we ended up in some big fight about use of my video, for example, in court. And you had to argue not, well, I have a license because there's one of these terms, but I have a license because, well, it was clear to everybody involved that I was allowed to do this. I didn't need written permission. I had implied permission. Everybody involved knew that I could do this, right? Well, what would that look like for YouTube? Well, YouTube makes it possible to play videos. And YouTube makes it possible to embed videos in other places. And it makes it possible to do other things, like put them in playlists or make creative reuse of them, right? So how closely does this track what we would expect if there were no legal terms? And overall, while this seems really restrictive, I mean, this is not do whatever you want, however you want. It's do what you want, only as enabled by YouTube. That might preclude or prevent, for example, downloading a video off of YouTube and then doing other things that YouTube doesn't support, like maybe making my voice sound like a chipmunk, or dropping a scene that you don't like, or skipping 10 minutes in the middle, or changing the colors or something like that, which might help the video. But if that's not a feature, if that's not something enabled by a feature of the service of YouTube, then that isn't covered by this license. Well, that doesn't seem so far off from what we'd expect. At least not what I would expect, but maybe your experience of YouTube is different. Right, so looking for what might have been surprising here, which is that emphasis that, hey, we can use your videos to promo YouTube as well. Well, that seems a little bit more surprising to me than this down here. This, at least to me, seems a little bit more like, well, what did people expect, and let's write that out in legal terms, as opposed to let's write out something in legal terms that's more or different than what people would expect if they never read these terms. Now, I'm done looking at these specific terms for now, but I do want to touch another point, which I know from having used some of the features of this service myself, which is I don't want people to take the wrong impression. I think YouTube provides an option to make videos under something called the standard YouTube license, but also under an option called a Creative Commons license. And I don't remember offhand which Creative Commons license. Creative Commons is an organization, you can find their website at creativecommons.org, which publishes licenses that you can use for free to make your work available for others to use, share, remix, build on, and so on, also free of charge. Now, they offer a number of different licenses that give it different permissions, in the same way that we've seen a difference in the scope in connection with the service in YouTube's business, or down here, only as enabled by a feature of the service. Creative Commons offers some different licenses that creators can choose from that give different scopes and permissions. For example, there are some, almost all, actually I think nearly all Creative Commons licenses require what they call attribution, which is, hey, if you make a copy of my video or use my video in something else, give me a kind of a credit. It's a little more specific and technical than that, but that's the gist. Some Creative Commons licenses say, well, you can share my work, but you can make changes to it. Or if you make changes to my work, then you need to make your work available under the same Creative Commons license. I would suspect that the Creative Commons license they enable is the one that just requires attribution or credit. But if that's the case, then you've given that permission in addition to this, I would say, or I would suspect, depending on the circumstances. So if you see this and say, well, that doesn't cover what I did with the video, but I thought I remembered something about Creative Commons or a different license that had been made available even through YouTube, you may have been right. And it's worth looking at a video before you use it in some other context to check whether it's the standard YouTube license or a Creative Commons license. Anyway, well, I'll leave it at there. This has already gone on a little while, but I hope that you've enjoyed this kind of smaller bite of me diving not through the terms as a whole, but into a specific part. If you're interested in me looking at other terms or answering other questions about the YouTube terms while they're fresh in mind, now please keep in mind that I can't be answering questions specific to your problem, and I won't be falling for anyone who tries to phrase their specific problem in a general way. But if you have other general themes or topics that you'd like me to speak my piece about while we're in the YouTube terms, let me know. If there are other terms that you'd like me to look at, I'd be interested in comparing these license terms to the Vimeo terms, for example. Also, let me know about that. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed talking about it. Enjoy reading Terms of Service. Bye-bye.